Must be sort of quiet. My husband's taking a nap. But being that it's Taco Tuesday, I have a lot to talk about. I was originally going to talk about a book that I've been reading that I absolutely love that is full of Al-Anon and Alcoholics Anonymous wisdom, but I'm going to push that to Saturday so I can talk about it in full. If you don't know who I am, I'm Suzanne Tidkmeyer. I used to write a column called No Longer Quivering for Pathos. Now I'm not doing that. Now I'm doing my own thing. I'm writing when I feel like it and where I feel like it. Just having a blast and getting ready to do a book, release book with Strange Fire. And it's all about my time living in evangelical, quiverful, non-denominational world and how incredibly bizarre it was. Let me just say before I get started, these are my opinions. I formulated them from my years of life experiences. You may have different opinions, and that's okay. We don't have to agree on everything. These also, back to being opinions, do your research. Anything I talk about, do your research and figure out what you think. Mel Smith says a lot of her videos, and she's absolutely right. Everybody should know what they think about stuff without relying on another person to translate or to feed them whatever. And don't bully anybody. Don't go real life. Don't harass anybody. Nothing. Do not contact anybody I ever talk about here because that tells me what a crappy person you are when you do that. And I have to talk a little bit about that too. So what I want to talk about is how the church uses the power and tactics of bullies. Bullying and piling on, dogpiling, harassment. That is a very important way that they use to keep you in line if you're in one of these taco churches, totalitarian, authoritative church organizations. If you're in a high demand religious organization, sooner or later you're going to experience bullying and harassment. And it can't always be very easy to deal with, but there are ways to deal with it, to effectively deal with it, to shut your bully down. Let me say first about bullying situations. I just want to throw a situation out there that's ongoing right now and say this is absolutely wrong. I hope that the person who's spearheading this goes to jail for stalking and harassment. Miranda Derrick, who dances for a company called 7M, she dances for 7M Management Company. And Miranda's parents and sister recently did a documentary on Netflix. Okay. Now the documentary was pretty one-sided, and I don't really care about that for documentaries at all. I don't care for that. I mean, even Tiger King looked at both sides. This did not. It just looked at one. And it's brought Miranda Derrick and her husband James Derrick a whole lot of harassment. They are involved in a church that I would consider a taco type church. But they're over 18. It's America. You're free to join a cult. You're free to shave your head. You're free to live your life how you please in some really bizarre ways. So you really can't tell anybody else what to do, okay? Which also plays into the whole bullying thing. You can't tell any others what to do. You can sit back and think, oh, you're crazy. Or, yeah, that's not very smart. But as far as telling everybody how to live, you need to knock that off. So Miranda posted a video last night where she's being harassed. I mean, people have followed them down the street, people doing drive-bys of their house, sending death threats, sending threats saying, if I see you outside, I'm shoving you in the trunk of my car. No, don't do that. And all of this hatred is coming because of one creator whose name I'm not even going to mention because I don't like driving people to watch her. You know, you know. So Miranda did this video last night asking to knock off, all these people to knock it off. And I am adding my voice to that, saying, please knock it off. Leave Miranda alone. If you want to be angry at the pastor, Robert Shin, be my guest. But don't Don't do the real life thing. Don't do the harassment. So back to the harassment and bullying in the church now that I've gotten that out of the way. It is a strange thing indeed, but it is what happens. When I left my old church, I dreaded to go outside in my little tiny southern town because I knew damn good and well I was going to run into somebody who was adjacent, maybe not even part of my old church, but part of a church in town, something. I remember being chased down one day by the sister-in-law of somebody at my old church who chased me down to tell me that I sucked in the extreme because I was now an apostate. And I had to pull this person aside and ask them a million questions. This is after I'd been proclaimed an apostate for a long time at that point, at least a year. But that is the power of the bullying and harassing that these high demand religious organizations bring, that when you leave, they will attempt to get you back. And they'll attempt to get you back by throwing rocks at you. Instead of realizing, hey, you changed churches. You didn't shave your head and join a cult. You changed churches. That's all. You still profess to believe in Jesus in pretty much similar ways. For me, we left and went to the Methodist church, which was the thing for me. I was able to sit on the pew and and do the deconstruction thing before was able to reconstruct and come up with a whole new way of living. So the deconstruction thing really bothers those in these high demand religious organizations. They see deconstruction as you completely becoming the kind of person that's floating down the river Styx naked while you're humming some kind of song with a lot of curse words. Instead of what it actually is, you're just examining what you believe and putting that into a different perspective. And maybe saying, hey, I don't believe this stuff, but I do believe this stuff. This other stuff, I don't know, I'm putting it over here. And I'm finding a way that works for me now that I've been through this CULT experience, because I'm reluctant to call any church a CULT because, as I've said many times, a CULT in my mind brings up Charles Manson and his followers, or Jim Jones in the jungle drinking the Kool-Aid. Bottoms up, drinking the Kool-Aid. So that's what I think about, not some of these churches. Even the ones that make you wear a jumper and a face-enhancing collar because they don't want anyone to look at your lovely lady lumps, which is silly because certain certain bra sizes, you're going to exhibit lovely lady lumps even when you're not trying to. So when you leave, they'll tell you all kinds of crazy things. They'll chase you down in the middle of the street. They'll invent they'll invent tales about you. I think the worst inventing of tales that happened to me was one time, and you have to realize this was about 2 years before I got my final mast cell diagnosis, before I was told I had my mastocytosis. I tried a different kind of lipstick, a high-end luxury one that I had a sample of, and I reacted to it. Okay, my lips swelled up. So here I am going through town. I think that was it. Either that or I ate something I'm allergic to. But my lips swelled up horrible. And when I got ready to go into town that day, I remember I had to run to the post office, and I went in the post office, and I ran into somebody that I've called Do Rag Head in my book because she always had a head covering. But it wasn't a respectful, nice head covering. She said like a corn up rag or something. So she was in there with her 85 children mailing something. The same time Mom went in there, and she walked right up to me and was sweet as pie to my face. She was one of the few that wasn't throwing rocks. Later that day, I got calls from several people I knew from my old church who wanted to know why I had had plastic surgery and lip plumping. And I had to disabuse those folks of that notion, tell them, look, I had an allergic reaction to something. I did not have plastic surgery or lip plumping. I would never do that. That's just not me. I don't care enough about my appearance to want to do that kind of crap. I go with what works for me, which is a minimal of everything. And that's kind of how it is. And I just kind of laughed about that because that was not at all what I expected to have happen out of that encounter. I expected her to throw rocks at me because usually the encounters, the way they went, was I would go somewhere. Like one time I went to a bakery to buy some of their rye bread and ran into somebody there who threw the "you're an apostate now" thing. And I had to say, "Come on, come with me. Let's go to the coffee shop and have a cup of coffee, my treat, and we'll talk about this." I talked about it to this lady and her daughter. They were adjacent to our church, sister-in-law and niece-in-law, I guess, to the niece to the guy I'm talking about. And I let her know how wrong that was and how much I'd hurt for her to say that crap. And I made her kind of regret her words. Most of the time, I didn't do that. The first year, year and a half, I ran away crying because I didn't understand that the bullying and the harassment is part of what they do when you leave. Because they can't handle the idea that somebody might think differently than them, somebody who once thought exactly the same as them. And the best way to deal with that is to minimize what it was you actually believe in. Because if you don't believe exactly the same way as them, and you once believed the same way as them, it threatens their entire worldview. So then they have to demonize you. They have to make you lesser and smaller so that they can cope with their own inner cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a huge thing in these high demand religious organizations. Also, um, my friend Cindy used to talk about biases. When you're there, you have a whole pile of biases. Now, we all have biases, little ones against things and against people and against, whatever. And it's really better to try to realize that and work on them. Okay. I've gotten better and better at that. And that's one of the things that my old church did give me a valuable tool that I've put more in practice since I left than anything when I was there. And that was saying and believing that I just lost my train of thought. I tell you, getting old is a bitch, isn't it? That was not taking offense. That was it. Not taking offense and not judging, those two things. Instead of sitting there thinking, look at that sleazy, slimy slut and that thong. Taking offense. I don't do that. I don't do that anymore. I turn this off. I don't have the inner thing. And that's what was so good about the book I read by Adam Nimoy, is he talked so much Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon things that I knew from the past, but I needed to be reminded of. And like one of them is, wait, why are you talking? And that was also useful when I am in those situations. I've learned to sit and wait and not talk and not run my mouth, to sit there and think about it a while before I say anything. That's why when people ask me about things that are going on in this world, like, what do you think about? I'm sure I'm going to get a spate of people asking me what I think about the Hunter Biden verdict and trial, and answer them eventually, but I'm not going to answer them today because I got to think about this. And so guarding your words and waiting to speak until you know what it is you actually think is not a bad way to go with these people. Another tactic that I've used successfully, and this is one that's kind of mean, but it's the Jesus one. When somebody starts talking at you like that and saying, "Why are you apostate? You're going to hell. How can you be going to hell after you experience Jesus with us?" So when you get people like that, say, I heard you were a believer now. Your best bet is to say, and who told you that? Where'd you hear that? And I say, Carol down the street said it. I wonder why Carol would say that. Because you're not going to church anymore. Said, hmm. I wonder why Carol considers going to the Methodist church not going to church. Because last time I checked, it's a church. Because of all those homosexual abortionists. Why do you think that the Methodist church is filled with homosexual abortionists? So you see, you go on and on and on, and you just throw questions back. You don't ever give them a real answer. You just keep throwing the questions back. And eventually, guess what happens? They get embarrassed and shut up because they realize what they're doing is inappropriate. Jesus was a master at using the question method because the question method reveals to the person what it is they're thinking and feeling. It's actually a good technique. Kind of semi-evil, huh? And that's really the best you can do. You don't take it in, you consider the source, you consider they're doing this because they're afraid that you might affect them. They're afraid that you leaving their church is like the flu or like they don't think about COVID. It is just not even part of their repertoire. And that's really the best way to shut these people down and to know what it is you actually believe. I mean, that's very helpful too, because I remember, like I said at the beginning, I was crying and freaking out because I felt like I'd been taken beyond the enclosure and I was doomed and damned just because I left because of the toxic nonsense. Because I did leave because of toxicity. And there's a chapter in my book where I talk about the day I left because it was a pretty weird, strange day. I left because my husband was going to the Methodist church for their first service. He started the last couple of months that he was at our old church going to going. He would go to the Methodist church 8 a.m. service, and then he would slide into our service. He would miss some of the Sunday school and sometimes some of the worship stuff. So that last worthless morning I was there, the pastor pulled me aside in the hallway and said, Hey, I don't think you should lead home Bible study anymore because Jim is going to the Methodist church. And I'm not comfortable not having a couple leading home Bible study. And I said, That's awesome. Take us off it. Yes, yes. And I'm doing handstands all the way down the aisle to the actual church when he told me we could no longer host home group because home group was a sticky, nasty situation. Every time toxic people would bring their toxic BS. I can't even begin to tell you all the things that happened. Every Wednesday, we would have our home group Bible study. And every Wednesday about noon, I would start getting nervous. By the time 5 or 6 had rolled around and I went down there to set it up at our clubhouse, I would have already popped a Xanax or two and repeated to myself those verses about I could do all things in Christ and all those verses about not having fear, not having anxiety. And it was useless. People would show up and do stupid stuff. I had a guy show up who went after the very pregnant daughter of one of the members because she was unmarried and like 9 months pregnant. She was there. And we were all loving and sweet to her. This man cornered her in the kitchen area and chewed her out and said, You were a terrible example to all the young people here, blah, blah, blah. So I was always dealing with some type of dysfunction in that group. So I was actually happy. So I went down and rehearsal started. I climbed up on the platform, grabbed my microphone, and away we went. So my young daughter was with me that day. She was seated in the chairs in the sanctuary about 3 rows back. And because the doors weren't closed, I was able to see from the platform all the way down the hallway. And the most problematic guy, the guy I'm talking about that did this to the young lady, came into the church and I saw the pastor grab him as he's walking past. And I don't know what was said, but something was said in that conversation because that guy, that S weasel, I'm going to call him what he is, came down and went to each and every person sitting in the chairs waiting for service, watching us rehearse, and told them that Jim and I had been removed as Bible study leaders. Them, okay? People who had nothing to do with our group at all. When he got behind my daughter and he was gossiping, and she was like 13, 14 at the time, she started weeping. I could see from the platform she was weeping. And I got off the platform when rehearsal was done and took her to the bathroom and said, "What happened?" And she told me that she heard what he was saying. He was going around gossiping to each and every person in there about her father and I being asked not to host Bible study anymore. And for me, that was the last straw in a whole pile of straws. And it didn't change how I believed, but it changed what I was willing to accept to hold on to my beliefs. Let's just put it that way. Because there were a lot of things I kept my mouth shut over because I felt they were kind of squishy and not really of God the entire time I was there. So I called my husband outside before he came in, right before worship. Said, "Hey, we got to talk." I uttered that really horrible phrase that married men hate to hear and told him very quickly what happened and said, "This is my last Sunday here. I'm not coming back." And we walked in, agreed we would tell the pastor after the service was over. Went up there, did worship, finished all that. When the service was over, we approached the pastor and asked for his blessing to depart the church. We were trying to leave in order and dignity and the right way. He refused. He refused to pray over us and send us on our way. He pretty much told my husband he could go on to the Methodist church if you want, but he told me I couldn't go. And he wanted to talk to me alone. I just said, "Talk to the hand. I'm not talking anymore. I'm done. The time for talking is past." Okay. And oh, I left that apart. Between the time that I heard this and the time Laura told me what was going on my daughter and grabbing my husband, I had said something to the pastor about, "You promised me, and you promised me again this morning that you would handle the tale terrorists, the gossipers, if they tried to gossip about this." And he's doing that. And the pastor turned to me and said, "That's your husband's job, not mine." This is after he told me before I even asked that he would take care of this, he would handle this. So the pastor refused to let us go. Fortunately, a dear pastor friend of ours who was there, was a mere member, said he witnessed all this and said, "Look, let me pray for you. You're leaving. Let me pray for you and send you away with order." So he did, and it was good. The guy Lee is dead now, but he was actually a decent, and deeply decent person that I went to church with that I ran into a lot after leaving. Okay. And he ended up leaving, but I don't really know why, and it's not important. The thing with churches, especially these taco type churches where you have high demand and you have all this other nonsense, people tend to pop in and out of there like popcorn. We saw it a bunch of times there. We saw people leave that I would have said were hardcore, would never leave that place. They left. So we left too. And it was the best thing we ever did. But it was a painful time for me, not so much for my husband, but for me because I had a deconstruction to do. Jim had already experienced um, so much dissonance in his head that he had already deconstructed in a lot of ways and had reconstructed. So I went on my deconstruction journey, and that's a whole different thing to talk about. One day soon, I probably will talk about that journey and about the journeys of people I know because I'm rewatching the show Mad Men right now. I'm only on the season 1, but it struck me. It struck me the other day when I was watching that Mad Men is primarily a show about journeys. Now, obviously, it's a show about advertising in the world of advertising in the 1960s. And sure enough, we had huge societal shifts that took place in the 1960s. But at its heart, it's a show about journeys, the journeys of the people in there, including Don Draper, who is not Don Draper, but Dick Whitman, and struggles with a lot of secrets and lies until the very end. He actually has kind of a breakdown and comes out okay. So Don was on a journey. Peggy was on a journey to break the mold of what expectations of women were. And on the other flip side of the coin, you had Betty Draper. Betty Draper, um, what was Henry's name? I don't remember. She married a guy named Henry. And she went on a journey, but rather than taking a step forward, she stayed stuck where she was in the expectations that society put onto her that she was going to be a wife and a mother to either an upper middle class man or an upper class man. And that was the limit of her expectations. Now, at the very end, we got to see Betty break out just a tiny bit when she went to enroll in college. Unfortunately, it was too little, too late. And I'm not going to spoil her for you what happened to Betty. But like I said, it's a show about journeys as much as my book is about a book about journeys, as much as the book I recently read about Adam Nimoy. It's a book of journeys. You know, you can't stay stuck. To stay stuck in the same old place is stagnant. Everybody has to move and groove ahead. Everybody. If you don't, if you stay stuck, it has all kinds of consequences. And in a place like that, there are bad consequences. So that's all it is, simply. They use bullying and coercion to keep you in line there. And we don't do that. That's always wrong. Okay, you guys hit like, subscribe, ring the bell notifications, all that nonsense that I'm supposed to say that YouTube wants me to say. YouTube's a really strange place. I'm thinking I'm going to rename my channel. A couple of reasons. It's funny because I thought about naming it Mia Culta instead of Mia Culpa, but because Mia Culta is kind of me leaving my CULT type church. But that's not my final word on it. I'm thinking seriously about doing something with Anonymous because many of the lessons from Alcoholics Anonymous, Al Anon, Narcotics Anonymous, a lot of those lessons really apply when we're leaving a toxic old religion. There are a lot of things, not just the weight thing that I reference. Why are you talking? There are a lot of things, including making amends. So you may see that pop up, but I'm probably going to change the channel name and do a few things differently. Okay, I love you guys. Have a wonderful Tuesday, Taco Tuesday, and I will see you later.